Welcome to the Relationships Decoding Podcast.
Ever find yourself wondering why that initial spark in a long-term relationship can sometimes, fade a bit, even when you still care deeply for your partner?
Yeah, it's a question many people grapple with.
Well, there's this really interesting phenomenon that might shed some light on that very thing. It's actually scientifically recognized, and it's called the Coolidge Effect.
Right, the Coolidge Effect. And it's all about the interplay between novelty and, the realities of long-term relationships, how that spark is affected over time.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore this whole Coolidge Effect thing. We'll look at where it came from, what's going on biologically, and how it might, subtly influence our behavior. And most importantly, we'll look at what we can do about it in our own relationships.
All based on some really fascinating research.
Oh, absolutely. But before we jump into the science, let's start with a little story about where this term actually comes from. It involves President Calvin Coolidge and the First Lady.
Ah, yes, a classic.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, and the Coolidges are visiting a government farm. They're doing separate tours.
Right.
So Mrs. Coolidge is in the hen house, and she sees this one rooster who's, well, let's just say he's very busy, doing his rooster thing.
Uh-huh.
So she asks the farmer, how often does he attend to his flock?
A very polite way of putting it.
Right. And the farmer, very matter-of-factly, says dozens of times a day.
Wow, that's a busy rooster.
I know, right? Anyway, Mrs. Coolidge finds this quite amusing and tells the farmer, please tell that to the president.
Oh, I bet she did.
So later on, President Coolidge is in the same area, and the farmer shares the story. The president, being curious, asks, does he mate with the same hen every time?
That's the key question.
Yeah, it is. And the farmer replies, no, sir. He changes hens each time.
And there you have it.
That's where it all started. President Coolidge, with a bit of a smile, said, tell that to Mrs. Coolidge. And that little exchange, that observation about the rooster's, shall we say, diverse romantic life, became the namesake for what we now call the Coolidge Effect.
So it's not just a funny anecdote. It actually points to a real phenomenon. The Coolidge Effect basically describes the tendency for males across many species to show more sexual interest in a new female compared to, well, a familiar partner.
So it's this inherent drive towards novelty when it comes to mating.
Exactly. And it's not just a quirky observation. There's actual science behind it.
Okay, so let's get into that. What's going on biologically? Why does this Coolidge Effect happen?
A big player here is a neurotransmitter called dopamine.
Dopamine, the feel-good chemical, right?
That's the one. Dopamine is all about motivation and reward. And when a male, whether it's a rooster or a human, encounters a potential new mate, there's a surge in dopamine.
So that excitement you feel when you meet someone new, that's partly dopamine doing its thing?
Exactly. But here's the thing. In a long-term relationship, as you become more familiar with your partner, that dopamine response can actually decrease a bit. The novelty wears off.
That makes sense. You get used to things.
Right. But then, if a new potential mate comes along, boom, that dopamine spikes again. That's why novelty can be so alluring, so exciting.
So it's like our brains are wired to seek out that dopamine rush.
In a way, yes. And that brings us to the evolutionary perspective. Why would males have evolved this way? What's the advantage?
Right. What's the evolutionary reason for this whole Coolidge Effect thing?
Well, the main theory is that it's all about maximizing reproductive success. For males, mating with multiple females increases the chances of passing on their genes. It's a numbers game.
So it's not that the rooster is trying to be unfaithful. It's more like he's programmed to spread his genes as widely as possible.
Exactly. It's a deep-seated biological drive. And it's interesting to contrast this with typical female mating strategies. Well, females tend to be more selective. They often prioritize mates who can provide resources and protection for their offspring. Their reproductive success isn't as tied to the number of mates.
It's more about quality over quantity, right?
Yes, exactly. It's about finding the best mate to ensure the survival of their offspring.
So this Coolidge Effect, it's not just a human thing then?
Not at all. We see it across the animal kingdom. There's a ton of evidence from studies on all sorts of animals. For example, there was this experiment with male rats.
Oh, tell me about it.
So these rats mated repeatedly with the same female, and as you might expect, their interest gradually declined. But then the researchers introduced a new female into the mix, and suddenly the males were very interested again.
So it's pretty fundamental then. It's not just something we learn. It's woven into our biology. across species.
Absolutely. The Coolidge Effect has deep evolutionary roots, suggesting it plays a significant role in the survival and propagation of many species.
That's fascinating. Okay, so now we understand what the Coolidge effect is, the biological basis, the evolutionary reasons, and we see it in the animal kingdom. But how does this all play out in human behavior? This is where it gets really relevant for us, right?
Absolutely. It's important to remember that human relationships are complex. We're not just driven by our biology. We also have culture, values, and individual beliefs that shape our choices.
Right, it's not as simple as saying, oh, the Coolidge effect makes men cheat, or something like that.
Exactly. But the Coolidge Effect can still have a subtle influence on our romantic tendencies.
Okay, so how do we actually see this play out in our lives? Can you give some concrete examples?
Sure. One example is the natural ebb and flow of passion in long-term relationships. That intense excitement of the honeymoon phase where everything is new is often driven by those high dopamine levels we talked about.
Right, when you can't keep your hands off each other.
Exactly. But as the relationship goes on and you become more familiar with your partner, that initial passionate spark can naturally fade a bit. It doesn't mean the love is gone, but the intensity might decrease.
Yeah, that's maybe when some people might be more tempted by the idea of something new, that allure of novelty, because it promises that dopamine rush again.
Right. And this is where our modern world comes into play. Think about the influence of social media and dating apps.
Oh, yeah, those are huge.
They are. You're constantly bombarded with images of potential partners. It's like a never-ending stream of novelty.
It makes you wonder, if you're constantly exposed to that, does it make you less satisfied with the steady, but maybe less intense connection you have with your partner?
That's a great question. It's possible that this constant exposure to novelty can make it harder to appreciate the deeper rewards of a long-term relationship.
So it's like we're training our brains to always crave that initial dopamine hit, rather than the different but equally important rewards of a committed bond.
It's something to think about. It's not necessarily a conscious choice, it's how our brains are wired. But being aware of it can help us make more informed decisions in our relationships.
So, knowing all this, what can we do about it? How can we navigate these inherent challenges? This is the part everyone's waiting for, right?
Definitely. So first and foremost, recognizing the Coolidge effect isn't about making excuses for bad behavior. It's about understanding ourselves better.
Right. It's not a free pass to cheat or anything like that.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we have this biological inclination towards novelty, but that doesn't mean we have to act on it. We have a choice.
So self-awareness is key. Recognizing that those feelings of attraction to new people aren't necessarily a sign that your current relationship is doomed.
Right. It's also crucial to remember what makes long-term relationships so special. The emotional security, the shared history, the deep companionship, those are things that novelty can't replicate.
You're trading a fleeting spark for a deep, enduring flame, so to speak.
Exactly. And another important aspect is considering the consequences. What happens if you act on those fleeting temptations? You risk hurting your partner, damaging trust, and creating instability.
Not to mention the potential guilt and regret.
Exactly. So awareness and self-control are essential, but there are also things couples can do together to keep their relationship vibrant.
Now we're talking. What are some practical tips?
One of the best strategies is to introduce novelty within the existing relationship. It's about finding new ways to experience things together, to create new shared memories.
Give us some examples. What does that look like in real life?
It could be as simple as traveling to a new place together. It doesn't have to be some exotic trip. Even a weekend getaway to a nearby town you've never explored can do wonders.
Oh, I love that. Exploring new places together.
Right. Or trying new hobbies as a couple, maybe taking a dance class, learning a new language, or trying a sport neither of you has done before.
So it's about having new experiences together, creating those shared memories and excitement.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be big, dramatic things. You could simply switch up your date night routine. Instead of always going to the same restaurant, try a different type of cuisine or a new activity altogether.
Keep things fresh and interesting.
Exactly. And of course, open and honest communication is crucial. Talk about your desires, your needs, and your expectations within the relationship.
Communication is always key, right? But especially when you're navigating something like this.
Absolutely. It allows you to address any potential challenges before they become big problems, and to ensure both partners feel heard and understood.
So to sum it all up for our listeners, the Coolidge effect is a real thing. It's a biological and psychological factor that can influence our attraction to novelty. but understanding it empowers us to make conscious choices in our relationships.
Right. It's not about ignoring our biology. It's about working with it to create the kind of relationships we want.
We need to remember that while the allure of newness is powerful, the deep connection and fulfillment of a long-term relationship are truly special. And sustaining that passion requires effort, creativity, and a commitment to investing in each other.
Absolutely. It's about making that conscious decision to nurture your relationship, to rediscover each other, and to keep the spark alive.
Now, here's a thought for you to ponder. If this drive for novelty is so deeply ingrained in us, what other areas of our lives might it influence? Our careers, our hobbies, even our shopping habits? It's a fascinating question to consider.
It really is. And as you go about your day, pay attention to those moments where you feel drawn to something new. Is it the Coolidge Effect at play? And how can you use this knowledge to make choices that align with your values and goals?
Food for thought. Thanks for listening, everyone, and happy reflecting.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.